Beauty from the Shelf is a podcast where industry experts fill in the gaps that are integral to growth for early stage beauty founders and brands. And today's episode includes a dive into digital. I speak with another friend of the Emerson Group, Andrea Leigh, a true OG retail digital expert, and we talk all things digital and, of course, all things beauty.
Commerce is changing so quickly, digital is changing so quickly, and beauty in particular is changing really quickly, like how the discovery process for beauty products, how we interact with beauty brands, it's all changing so quickly.
A little more on Andrea. She is no stranger to e-com retail. She has 10 years of experience as a category leader at Amazon in a variety of categories, including health and beauty, hardlines, and fashion. She's also the founder of the Allume Group, which is a company that works with hundreds of consumer brands to build their e-com strategy through online courses and workshops. This conversation with Andrea was both resourceful and relevant, with callouts that can help brands at a variety of stages assess their digital strategy. I'm really excited for you all to hear the content today. Let's get into it. So I'm really excited to talk about digital, talk about, beauty or things that can specifically help brands as they're looking to navigate either entering into starting a new brand or trying to grow their brand in this super competitive, consistently changing space. So we know that there are two ways to go into retail in the digital space. There's that pure DTC play, and then there's, e-com or omnichannel, if you will, right? If you're partnering with another retailer. I'd love for you to just kind of talk about some benefits to having a pure DTC business versus going with that kind of e-commerce or omnichannel strategy.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting, like what I would like to know is how much business is being done on direct-to-consumer sites for beauty relative to pure play e-com or omnichannel. And it's really hard to get your hands on that information. And it depends on how you define beauty. But generally speaking, I would say, most brands are doing more sales through either omnichannel players or through pure play like Amazon versus on a D2C site. But that's not always true for every brand. I think the ones that started really early in the D2C space kind of gained a good foothold. And I think the ones that are entering now, there are some more challenges. The market's a little more saturated. Shoppers are a little more focused on convenience. But I do think there are some real benefits to a D2C business for a beauty brand. And kind of some of the biggest ones are around control of retail pricing, control of distribution, having ownership over that data of the shopper to make some strategic decisions. I think there's also an opportunity to use a D2C experience as like a sandbox to test new product launches and new promotional plans. And you can really, as a D2C site, you can really customize your site for your shopper and how they shop for your product. And I think that's probably one of the biggest benefits relative to a pure play like Amazon, which is that you can offer things like loyalty programs and, auto replenishment on schedules and in formats that make sense for you and for your shoppers. You can do sampling. There's a lot of bells and whistles that you can kind of add to that experience. And you can really own the brand experience from start to finish. So everything from when the shopper is discovering the product all the way through until they receive it on their front porch. And I think working with other retailers, you kind of lose some of that control of that experience along the way, especially when you get to fulfillment and things like that. So there are definitely a lot of benefits of doing direct to consumer for brands, but there's some challenges too. And I think those are, in some cases, for some brands, maybe even unsurmountable. And the biggest one is just the expense of acquiring customers. So, relative to working with a pure play like Amazon, who has a super broad reach, and, they're the ones that are acquiring the customers, you've got to pay for that yourself. And it's really hard to get shoppers to visit a new website. So there's the expense of acquiring customers. The fulfillment costs can be pretty hefty, might be more expensive than working with a pure play retailer. It's also just a lot of work. So you have to, you have to manage a website. You've got to figure out how you're going to work, with all of the different cross-functional responsibilities that you're going to have, and it'll grow slower. The sales growth is going to be probably slower than what you would see if you had like mass distribution.
That's really interesting. I thought the one key point that I took away on the benefit side was that control that you have over that customer experience, especially if you think about creating a brand, if you are being very intentional about that brand voice and that brand purpose. There's a lot that you can do there in that DTC experience that can make it feel really special, that really could generate some good loyalty to hopefully help that consumer come back for more, right? But then like on the flip side of that, like those costs, they can be really, really tough to kind of get over.
Yeah. And I think one of the things we're seeing is that there's an increased need from shoppers to have that sort of personal connection with the brand. And so that control can be really important. Like I follow a lot of beauty influencers and I buy a lot of beauty products on D2C sites. And I love how I buy from this influencer who has her own line and her name is Trini London. And when you order the product, it comes in like very special packaging. Like the whole experience is cool. You have to choose 3 samples before you can check out. So you get a chance to try out some of the other products. And, it feels like a whole personalized experience in the packaging and everything. And it's a lot more exciting than opening a box from Amazon. And so you do, as a result, as a shopper, you feel more of a personal connection with that brand because you're having a richer experience.
I feel like that's one of the reasons why beauty retailers like a Sephora or an Ulta, right, were consistently a destination because you kind of knew, like I knew, like, I'm in the VIB club for Sephora. I'm going to get my birthday gift. I'm going to get to choose my 500-point gift. Like, those are the reasons why I'm like, oh, I'm going there. Not even thinking about if I'm spending more. Can I get, a drugstore alternative? I wanted that experience. To your point, it's like, that just makes you feel really good.
Yeah.
And that's part of the beauty experience, right? Like, that's part of, I think that's a really important thing for a beauty brand. Is like that experience. There is a part of beauty that is about pampering yourself, that is about, if you want to call it self-care or wellness, that just makes you feel like, this is why I do this.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I know as you spoke a little bit about challenges also, I know that inflation is something else that is impacting the DTC model. You talked about the customer acquisition costs and those being extremely, extremely high. There's also, this thing called inflation that I hear is impacting some folks. We know, I say that, with sarcasm, we know it's impacting the cost for brands, the cost for consumers, retailers, everyone is impacted by it. Do you have any ideas of what brands can do to combat some of these challenges or what things they can do, to try to get new customers? Are there other things they can do to combat some of these challenges that are very much present and very significant these days?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first, I think in order to kind of drive down that customer acquisition cost, you just have to be really smart about how you're driving traffic to your website and how you're acquiring customers. So the more you can find organic ways to drive traffic, the better. And I realize that's hard. But it's really kind of focusing on having a good, strong social presence, having an organic following that you can, communicate with, maybe working on some celebrity endorsements or some partnerships, but finding ways to leverage other people. If you don't have the network yourself, like finding ways to leverage others' network is kind of one of the biggest ways. And that's just on the traffic side. I think that's probably the biggest challenge is just the customer acquisition cost of selling on your own DTC site. To manage some of the other challenges, I think it's really about like working maybe with some partners, fulfillment partners. There are companies such as Shopify and others that have kind of a whole host of solutions for consumer brands that want to be D2C to kind of help you get up and running quickly. Those can be expensive, but help manage some of the workload of working in acquiring all of those new skill sets. And they provide kind of a one-stop shop for brands that need to get up and running quickly. And then, as your business grows, you can move away from those types of more expensive partners and look to build or acquire or whatever you need to do.
That's really helpful. I know, as you mentioned Shopify, I think about one conversation that I had with a founder, and she was saying, I almost feel like I'm too small to go to a support partner, but I'm also almost too big to still be doing this myself.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, is there a secret, formula, or something that can help brands understand, like, when you're at that size where it probably makes sense to start to outsource, or, when you should continue to do it yourself? Because to your point, it's expensive to hire people. You need to hire people that already know what they're doing. And cash
Yeah.
flow is just so crucial to early stage brands. It can be tough to navigate. Do you have any tips or advice around that, or general, marker?
Yeah. It's interesting. I think my answer is not going to be very beauty specific. It's going to be more founder specific. And as a founder and CEO of my own company and having run other companies in the past, but I think it's just like looking at sort of doing like an hours mapping for an average week for yourself as a founder and understanding where you're spending your time and then comparing that to where you think you should be spending your time, right? And and identifying what is the path that's going to get you there. If you know that as a founder for your particular brand, for example, that you have to get the best return on your time when you're out there being the face of the company, or maybe you're a product person and your time is really best spent and you get the best ROI working with your product team and, concocting new formulas and those types of things. Or maybe it's more on the packaging and branding side, whatever I think is the area that you're able to add the most value to your organization is finding a way to map your time to be spending most of your time doing that. And that exercise sometimes might make it very obvious where you need external support or outsourcing support.
That's really good. As we kind of talked a little bit about, how brands can combat some of the challenges specifically around DTC, I'd love to dig a little bit deeper into that customer acquisition and what brands can do to really stand out in the digital age. You talked about some organic options that they can do, or, trying to attract options organically. What can they do to stand out and acquire new customers?
Well, first, I would say it's really hard. So acknowledging that is important, that this is a difficult thing to do, and particularly with the inflation impact. And what we're seeing with inflation impact is that I think probably everyone's read a study or another about inflation, but depending on the source that you're looking at, you've got anywhere between 40 and 75% of shoppers that are not sure how they're going to pay their bills, right? Like they're really worried about, and some of them are digging into savings. I think another thing that's interesting, it's scary, but it's also an opportunity, is that some of the data I'm going to quote actually is from this great report, which we can put a link in the show notes, but there's a glossy.co report that came out like very recently, and it had some great data in it. So that was sort of hot off the press that I was looking at this morning. But 75% of shoppers said they purchased an alternate brand due to price. And almost half of shoppers in a different studies, they've exercised that brand switching strategy often within the last few months. So value is so important right now. And it's really interesting because, a couple of the big beauty and CPG companies, I think it was P&G, released their earnings last week, and they came out ahead of expectations. And if you really think about what those brands are doing, they're allowing choice within their portfolio. So if you don't have something for the shopper to trade down to right now, it might be time to start thinking about building that breadth into your portfolio, because the brands that have that are going to maybe thrive in this environment, and the brands that don't might struggle a little bit more. So I think that importance of choice is key. And again, you could look at this as something that's scary or something that's an opportunity. There's definitely, with crises comes opportunity. So the choice is really important. We talked about personal connection already. I think beauty is often looked at in inflationary times as an area where people can exercise little splurges. So we know that shoppers are postponing large ticket purchases further out into the future, but there's nothing that feels nicer than, engaging in some little splurge that kind of makes you feel good about yourself, but doesn't break the bank. And beauty products can often be those things for shoppers. And there's this Estee Lauder term called the lipstick index. I don't know if you've ever heard this before, but they talk about when times are tough, women buy lipstick. There's some quote or something like that from Estee Lauder that I thought was really funny. So I think positioning some of our marketing and our messaging to our shoppers around those little splurges can be a really useful tactic in an inflationary period. We also know that shoppers are really increasing their time spent doing research on products now. And that's just a natural trend, but it's also an inflation impacted trend because shoppers want to be more careful where they're putting their dollars. So that video and other content is so important right now. In fact, we know that on social media, at least on Instagram, I read a social media report the other day that more than half of our time on Instagram is now spent on video. And think about how different that is from like 2 years ago, right? It was mostly static content, and now it's mostly video content. So in those investments in video and product content and information, I think is really important in social media. And then influencers are hugely critical. So a recent report came out that shows that shoppers rely on influencers more than friends and family for recommendations now. That just flipped in like the last couple of years. So used to be friends and family always came first, and now influencers are above that. And in this Glossy report, they said that 61% of shoppers said that the reason that they rely on influencers is that they believe they have the best product expertise. And so in some ways, you could look at influencers as replacing the associates in the stores that we used to leverage at the beauty counter or maybe at Ulta or Sephora. So those are some suggestions that I would have for brands to really ensure that they're not only staying relevant in an inflationary period, but they're actually finding ways to grow. And then the last thing I would say is not to be too short-sighted. So those are all things that are super relevant right now. But I think it's easy when times are tough and budgets are tight to set aside some of our longer term, goals and objectives as brands. And if you just take a look at, for example, the sustainability movement, that hasn't gone away. There are still in, this most recent study from Glossy, 37% of shoppers are still looking for formulas that are clean or free of harmful chemicals. Packaging is still really important. So even if you can't make a lot of investments in those areas right now or whatever ties to your long-term strategies, figuring out ways to kind of keep that moving, because coming out of the inflationary period, brands who have made progress on those are going to be ahead of those that didn't continue to prioritize those. So that's kind of the last thing I would say is just, yes, be short-sighted, but also don't be too short-sighted.
Those are some really, really good nuggets there and really interesting just in terms of the amount of content. Well, first, I was really surprised by that first number that you talked about with brands switching to value.
75%.
That's wild. I recently had a conversation with someone else for the podcast, and we were saying, luxury is one of those things where if you can't afford to buy an $8,000 Chanel purse, well, then a $30 lipstick, Chanel lipstick, right, is something that might be within reach. Because while that still is expensive for a lipstick, it still is much more within reach than that $8,000 bag. And so beauty, interestingly, gives consumers this opportunity to still feel like they can splurge, to still have a bit of luxury, or even if it's a nice fragrance, but not to necessarily have all the zeros, all the trailing zeros.
Yes, I totally agree. Those little splurges are so important right now.
Yeah. So I'd love to kind of shift and talk a little bit more about e-com and omnichannel for beauty brands. Would love if you could just give a general overview of who some of the key players are in e-com.
Yeah, I mean, the big players for pure play is just Amazon. So, they're the giant. They account for 65% of global health and beauty e-commerce planned for 2025. So I don't know what they are right now, but the projections show that in 3 years, they'll be at about 65% of global health and beauty. So for e-com, I don't know if I believe that number, but it's going to be around half.
That's huge.
It's huge, right? But I don't know that that's where shoppers go to discover products. So if you think about, this is a different category example, but I used to run the baby category on Amazon. And when we worked with brands, we learned that Amazon was often the destination for second-time parents, but not first-time. Because the first-time parents wanted to go see the stroller in person, or this was a long time ago, or, make their registry somewhere else where they could get more help with it. But the second-time parents would come and buy and set up all their registries and buy all the stuff on Amazon. And so it's not unlike that with beauty, where I think the discovery is happening in the digital space somewhere, maybe social media or video or YouTube or influencers, or maybe on, a retailer website or an omnicommerce website. But I also feel like Amazon might be getting a lot more of the repeat business versus the first time discovery. And it's not to say they aren't getting the first time discovery, but My theory is that they get more of the repeat and replenishment business than anything else. So it's important to have a presence there. But outside of Amazon, it's super fragmented. I mean, I think I would say it sort of goes to D2C after that, like all the brands that are selling products on their own websites. And then, the other, I would add this as a key player in e-commerce, which is all of the influencers and their own brands. Because beauty influencers, I mean, now we've seen so many of them come and launch their own, beauty, cosmetics, or skincare brands and get national distribution at retailers. And so it's definitely something to keep an eye on. But just for e-com pure play, I think it's really an Amazon game right now.
That's so wild to me because 10 years ago, we would not have said that. The growth that they've experienced as a digital retailer, it's wild to me. I also think it's interesting that you talked about them being kind of good for a second, someone who's already discovered, right? A replenishment. I think that's something of note for early stage beauty brands to think about when they might time launching, at an Amazon. So it might not necessarily be the best route for you to go when you're first acquiring those new customers because it's going to be so expensive. And again, you're probably, if you're doing some really cool things, some of your main competitors that do have more consumers are probably going to buy all of the keywords that you would use.
Yeah. I mean, you can employ a discovery strategy on Amazon. It'll just be expensive. Targeting shoppers who've already bought your product or are bidding on your own brand name is a super high ROI activity on Amazon from a retail media perspective. So I think it's just something to be mindful of in the advertising strategy too, in the retail media strategy. I mean, it's just kind of going back to like basics of marketing. But if you think about who is your shopper, what are they looking for? What platforms are they on? And I think on Amazon for beauty, you can certainly employ a discovery or discoverability campaign or program there. And they have lots of tools to help you do that or steal share from other brands. But those strategies are expensive. It's very difficult to get a shopper when they've searched another brand to buy something different. That's a hard sell. The data shows that if a shopper searches a brand, they're most of the time just going to buy that brand. But if you know that you're targeting repeat shoppers, you can grab them while they're looking for other stuff. You can use a lot of tools within Amazon to remind them to repurchase or try something else in your portfolio. And those strategies can be really high return.
Okay, thanks. That's super helpful. You mentioned a retail media agency. I know that this is something that I feel like is getting more and more traction where retailers are coming out with their own retail media agencies to help boost their own digital sales. And honestly, it feels like to generate revenue by charging brands to essentially sponsor on these websites. Can you talk about how that has impacted e-commerce? Do you see that as being a valuable way to have a higher customer acquisition cost? Do you think it's still too new to say? Just would love your general thoughts on it since I feel like it's a new and burgeoning thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So for the listeners that aren't as familiar with retail media is when the retailers have advertising platforms on their own websites or allow brands to target their audience off of their site. So that's a demand side platform. And most retailers have these now. Amazon was kind of the first one a few years ago. And so advertisers can advertise on these retailer websites kind of as they would in traditional media, right? They can target specific shoppers. In the case of retail media, you can target specific searched keywords, which makes it, really lucrative. And retail media is unique in so many ways, but one of the biggest ways is how closely related to the commerce business that it is. And so brands can see and advertisers can immediately see if purchases were made as a result of the advertising. And so the data is very compelling, to show you if your strategies are working. The challenge with them is they add cost to working with these retailers. And for some of the retailers like Amazon, more and more of the search results and the real estate on the website is advertising now. So it's more of a pay-to-play platform. Some of the other retailers, such as Target or Walmart, haven't gone that far. They're still protecting the integrity of the search experience, but there are some advertisements. So it kind of depends on the platform. But I absolutely think that it is a hugely important way to get your product in front of shoppers with the right strategy. And that just kind of goes back to what we were just saying, like thinking about what are we trying to accomplish on this platform as such, who are the shoppers that we're going to go after, and then what strategies are we going to employ. And the other thing that's really unique about retail media relative to traditional media is that it is not a set it and forget it program. You're not making all of your media buys once or twice a year and sort of committing to them for the season. It is an always on activity. So you can look week to week and see, well, how did those keywords perform? And should I change the strategy? And should I try something new? And if it's working, should I put more dollars towards that and pull dollars away from something else? So it's a very hands-on activity. And for a lot of brands, it means they need to work with a partner to help them, run that advertising. There are so many partners available to do that on a whole range of cost structures that can help brands be really successful there. But I think it's an absolute must-do if you're playing on one of the platforms that has retail media to be advertising in it.
That's really, really good. I remember when I was at Target, their retail media platform is called Roundel now. And I know I would be able to talk to brands and they could say, yes, we're going to pay this and we're going to target specifically customers that are this age group and this demographic and this, household income or whatever it is. I mean, to your point, you can get really specific if you're seeing, hey, it looks like for sales, we might be losing traction to premium consumers. So maybe there's something that we can do to market them specifically and talk to them. And that's really, really cool. So I'd love to talk a little bit about omnichannel. We talked about Amazon and kind of this e-com play, but I know some brands will talk to an omnichannel retailer like a Target or an Ulta, so a retailer that essentially has majority of their sales happen in physical stores, but they have an online presence, right? And they get the offer to start on e-com. What are some benefits to this and what are some watchouts?
Yeah. Well, I think the biggest benefit is that a lot of those retailers have a lot of scale. And so they've got a lot of shoppers. And so there's opportunities to access a larger audience. I think, we just, for our company, we just produced courses on Walmart and we're working on Target for advertising for retail media and also some fundamentals courses on them. And one thing that we heard a lot was, so the shopper journey is really different on those platforms versus Amazon. So on Amazon, you search, you're going to get it delivered. You're able to access the Amazon's entire assortment. You might choose a filter on the left. Maybe you want to make sure you can get it tomorrow. And then the assortment kind of shrinks a little bit to what's available to you, what they can ship to you tomorrow. On Walmart and Target, the shopper usually starts with that. They know if they're going to do a pickup order or if they're going to do a ship to home order or if they're going to do home delivery, grocery, or what they're going to do. And so they're often starting the experience by making one of those choices, which immediately whittles down the assortment to whatever's in your local store or whatever can be shipped to your home. And we also know that for Walmart and Target, most of their click to order sales, and when I say click to order, I mean, shoppers starting the journey online and building a basket online, whether they pick it up or get it shipped or whatever, most of their click to order sales are buy online, pick up in store. So for brands that get the offer to test something online, I just would temper your expectations a little bit because we know that the shopper starts on those platforms and filters for probably buy online, pick up in store. So they're not going to see your product because it's not going to be in the local store. So I wouldn't call it a watch out because it doesn't mean it's a bad idea. I would just temper your expectations in that Target and Walmart still have really small shopper bases that are getting stuff shipped to home relative to the buy online, pick up in store. So kind of tempering the expectations there, I think is really important. And then when you are able to get into some of the brick and mortar stores, again, tempering your expectations. If you're only in a handful of doors or you're doing a test or something like that, only the shoppers in those regions are going to see that assortment if they're picking up. So that's something to be mindful of. But we also know there are still a lot of shoppers that are getting products shipped to home. There are advertising opportunities. You can make use of those retailers' demand-side platforms and just use their audience data to send advertisements to shoppers when they're on other web properties. So you can still access that audience data. I think you're just going to have to work a little harder.
That's really good.
That's kind of like the biggest thing to know, I think. And even if you don't get a lot of reach or a lot of demand, Target or Walmart might still think that's a good test. And it might be still a good enough test for them to put the product in the physical store. So I think it's just like understanding what metrics they're going to be looking at to decide if they're going to roll it out and, how that's going to be measured. And then making sure that your forecasts for production and stuff are kind of a little bit tempered, knowing that those shoppers kind of shop a little bit differently on those platforms. So I think that's kind of the biggest thing to know. But working with some of the omni-channel retailers like Target, Walmart, Kroger, I think for beauty, probably Sephora and Ulta are really important ones as well. I think they're the top two right now. So I think the things to know there are, you get the scale of those platforms. You might have some cost savings relative to direct to consumer. It depends. You kind of have to do the math on that and do the comparison. But you get a lot of data and you get a real good look at your competitors. I think that's something that's important as well, is to understand who your competitive set is. If you've been mostly selling D2C, you might think but when you really are on a retailer website and your products are sitting next to others in search, I think you get a much better idea. And some of the retailers will share some of that data. Like Amazon shows what other things people put in their basket, and you can get, share of search results data from, depending on what data providers you're looking at, that help you analyze some of the competitors in search. So I think that can be really valuable because you can see if someone is performing better than you, like maybe reverse engineering their strategy. Like, what are they doing? Are they doing something different than me in retail media? Do they have more reviews? Is there something about the product? Like, what's happening? So that information can be really informative. And then a lot of those platforms that we just talked about offer personalization at like a much larger scale than what you can do on your own D2C website. So your products are going to be included in that personalization engine as well. And then we talked about retail media, that's kind of an important benefit of working with some of those omnichannel retailers. For watchouts, I think the biggest one is pricing compression. So if you're selling directly to the retailers, they might discount the products. They're going to price match everyone who's out there. So that's the number one most important thing to be mindful of when you go to market on any digital commerce entity, is the level of pricing transparency that we're in right now as shoppers and as retailers. And so just being really careful about who you decide to sell to and understanding what their strategy is. Or if you don't want to sell directly to them, most of them have third-party platforms now where you can be your own seller on the platform. Target and Walmart are a little bit less of open marketplaces than Amazon is. They have to approve the sellers and things like that, but it's something to consider. So I think that's one thing to be careful of. And then this isn't specific to omnichannel, more specific to Amazon, but these lookalikes and counterfeits can be a real problem in the beauty space. We call them lookalikes when they're not directly a counterfeit product, but there's a competitor that's popped up that makes packaging that looks remarkably like yours. It's a different name, but it's like the same color. And those are pesky problems because they even confuse shoppers sometimes. So having a good strategy around that, I think, is important too.
There's just so much more to watch out for. I hadn't heard about the lookalikes. So I'm like, oh man, I didn't know you could be getting counterfeit beauty products. It's instead of Sunday Riley, it's Fun Day Filey, I don't know. It's
Yeah. I mean, I do think it is one of the main reasons that Sephora and Ulta are doing so well is that, there's a different level of trust that you have for a retailer who is only buying product and putting it in their warehouse as a shopper, right? I think that shoppers can be a little bit more distrustful of Amazon on occasion when it comes to products that we eat or we put on our bodies. And so I do think that has hurt their growth in the space. I mean, as much as it can hurt their growth if they're trending toward 50% of online beauty sales. But I think that is a little bit of a hindrance from a shopper perspective sometimes, and why some of those other platforms do really well.
That's really good. I think just last question, because this has been super helpful. I've learned a lot as I'm more experienced on the brick and mortar side. So definitely feel like I've learned a lot of nuggets about e-commerce and digital. But are there any other free or low cost resources that could be helpful to a founder or team member from an early stage brand that could help them, in your area of expertise or just anything out there?
Yeah. So, first I'll plug our stuff. So we've got e-learning on our website on all the digital commerce topics. So check those out. And the courses are priced really competitively, and you can just go online and take them.
Thank you. We'll definitely include that in the show notes because Allume is one of those words that can be hard to spell. So if you want to spell it out.
Yeah, it's ALLUME group.com. And so we've got e-learning courses on our website. And then every quarter we publish a free report called the E-commerce Insider Quarterly. And so we just published this last quarter. And that's actually where a lot of my data came from today, is we kind of go out and scour the internet and kind of consolidate everything into 10 key concepts for everyone. Check that out, and it's free. In terms of other resources, I would say for publications, the ones that I really like to read are glossy.co. That's where some of this data came from one of their reports. They cover beauty and fashion and skincare, and I think they do a really nice job. They have a daily newsletter. The other ones that I like are Retail Dive They also tend to cover a little bit more on the beauty side. And then there's another one by Vox Media called The Goods. And that one's a little bit more like beauty/pop culture. And I really enjoy that one because that kind of keeps me in touch with what's fresh and new. And so I enjoy that one a lot. For podcasts, this isn't specific to beauty, but I really like for e-commerce, the Jason and Scott Show. It's like one of my favorite podcasts. They release like a very long episode once a month, and they usually cover the big e-commerce or omni-commerce retailers. Like they do a big earnings recap. So I think it helps helps us build our strategy to understand kind of the macro environmental forces at play. So I think that's a good podcast. And then I think the biggest way is to like just shop. That's how you stay current, right? Shop for beauty products, follow beauty influencers on YouTube and on social media and TikTok, and just kind of keep track of what they're doing. Because that's how you're going to get alerted to some of the best strategies and some of the most current strategies. So really spending some time immersing yourself in the space and following some of those influencers, I think will give you lots of ideas.
That's so good. I always say I'm a forever consumer. I love shopping. So that's why buying was like, wait, you're going to pay me to shop? Okay. I think I'm in heaven.
I got that.
But yeah, there's so much to learn by, putting yourself in the shoes of the shopper and saying, what is my experience like? What's my experience like shopping at a Target in the city, right? Like, even if you're in New York, what's my experience like shopping at the Target in Midtown? And what's my experience shopping at the Target in Brooklyn? Very different, right? It might actually be bad. New York is probably a bad example for Target, but you get the idea.
No, I agree, Monique. I think when you're traveling, like making sure to go check out some of the retail experiences for your category is a great way to stay current on the competitive brands, how your brand is showing up in retail if you're there. All of that, like you said, immersing yourself and putting yourself in the shoes of the shopper is so important.
I love that. Well, thank you so much. There are so many fantastic nuggets today. I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your knowledge. And again, you have free resources available on your website. So I encourage folks to check that out and get that knowledge. And just thank you again, Andrea.
Thanks for having me, Monique. Talk to you soon.
All right. Thank you so much to Andrea from the Allume Group for joining us on the podcast today. I got some great takeaways from the conversation. No, things aren't as easy as they were if you are going straight to the consumer, and rising costs certainly aren't helping. But there are still things that you can do. The retail media networks are certainly a fantastic opportunity to really get a great ROI and making sure you remind customers to go in for repeat purchases. There's a lot of relevance in loyalty and experience that can still come into play in the digital first mindset. And also that digital first option at an omnichannel retailer might not be the best launch option. Who knew? That was such a great nugget for me. Now, as always, I will include all of the additional resources about the Allume Group and Andrea in the show notes. And I just want to thank you again for tuning in. Please leave us a review, share this with friends and colleagues, and I'll catch you on the next episode. Bye.